咁多位大家好啊，歡迎大家收睇咧基督教家信教嘅廣東話主日崇拜嘅網上直播啊！今日有敬牧師同大家見面啦，咁希望大家咧過去咧都有個好開心嘅一個聖誕節啦。咁咧我本人嘅聖誕節咧就真係好正嘅，我去咗主任牧師 Steve 同 Sharon 牧師屋企啦。咁我總共咧有22個人喺同一間屋裏邊過聖誕，呢個真係好特別嘅。同埋咧大家見到啦，我雖然聖誕過咗啦，我哋仲有聖誕樹喺度，而且見唔見到啊？我仲有件綠色衫、藍色嘅襪嘅，咁所以聖誕嘅氣氛係仲未過，大家依然可以咧陶醉喺聖誕氣氛裏邊噶。咁嗱，講開聖誕節啦，咁咧過去咧 Steve 同 Sharon 牧師喺聖誕節之前咧都去咗美國呢個地方咧，咁去周遊唔同嘅教會喎，咁去咗一個嘅復興特會啦。咁咪聽咗個特會嘅一個嘅牧師講道啦，佢就話咧咁耐以嚟啊，做咗幾十歲人啊，聽一個咁嘅講道真係覺得好正嘅，好特別嘅。咁幾咁特別咧？嗱，我諗大家一陣間咧就有機會咧可以睇到咁特別嘅講道啦。咁但係我先介紹下嗰個嘅講者先。咁呢個講者就係一位牧師嚟嘅，咁就叫做Mark牧師喎。Mark 牧師咧，咁原本咧就喺加拿大一個嘅教會裏邊咧，咁就開始一個嘅全國性嘅一個嘅復興嘅一個嘅運動嘅。咁但係將呢個嘅運動咧蔓延到美國呢個地方啦。咁而美國人咧都識得呢個嚟自加拿大嘅 Mark 牧師喎。咁好啦，咁我講咗少少嘅背景啦，咁都希望大家喺一陣間咧喺講道嘅影片上面咧，大家都可以咧更進一步嘅了解 Mark 牧師同埋佢講嘅一個主題啦。咁好啦，事不宜遲，我哋一齊去片啦。
Oh my gosh! All right, grab a seat. Good to be here. I have to say, I've never been introduced as not normal. And it wasn't like just once. He kept doubling down like over and over. It's like, we got it, bro. Chill. All right, so here's what I want you to do. Ephesians chapter 1 is where we're going to be, and we're going to unpack two verses. And I just want to say, Pastor Dudley, thank you for having me here. Thank you for caring about these people in your city, that they meet Jesus, that they grow. You're sitting there weeping in worship. This man is serious about Jesus, and he's serious about serving y'all. So thank you, sir, for inviting me here. You are an amazing man. Paul, when he writes the book of Ephesians, and why I want to share a couple verses out of the book of Ephesians with you tonight is because it's such a great book that the church goes back to over and over again and looks into and says, what do you have for us at such a time as this? And you would agree we're in a time where our world needs to have a view of Jesus that will change their life. And the beautiful thing about the gospel is it doesn't just change what you do, it changes what you want to do. And Paul writes this book, and he says, I want to unpack who Christ is and how he can change your life. And right at the beginning of it, he says this. He introduces himself, and he starts off, and he says, Paul. Now, stop right there. Okay, listen. Here's why that word alone is so beautiful. Some of you came in here tonight, and you think that Paul, when he introduces himself, that name, that guy, he must be a really great guy. He must be super righteous. He must be perfect. He must, be on the worship team, because the people that God uses to do anything in life are the perfect people, are the good people, are the people who've memorized their Bibles. They're the people who've never watched a rated R movie. They're people who certainly have never done the things you have done. And you walked in here and you feel the shame and the guilt of your life. And you think, man, I'm not the kind of guy or gal that God would ever use to do anything. And I am here to tell you the Apostle Paul was not a perfect person. He oversaw the murder of the first Christian. Those are the kinds of people that God uses to change the world. People just like you. You are a disaster. I don't know what your kindergarten teacher told you, but you are narcissistic, sinful, all about yourself, and yet God uses you to do amazing things and still loves you and still redeems you and still treasures you. Listen, for those of you going, no, man, you don't understand. You don't know what I've done with my family. You don't know how I messed up my life. You don't know the way that I was raised. I am the poster boy for God could never use me. I was raised in a family where my dad, I had never walked into a church until I was 19 years old. When I came into a church, the only reason I stayed was because there was pretty girls there. All right, can I get an amen from the youth section or whatever? All right, so the only reason I didn't want to go to church, because here's what in my mind, growing up in a non-Christian home, in my mind, church was just going to be orange, shaggy carpet. Everyone was going to be 200 years old, and I was going to go in there. It was going to be boring, and the first church I ever walked into was exactly like that. So I went in, and God made, but here's the crazy thing. My family, when I was raised, my mother, my dad was like a hardened atheist, very atheistic, like didn't want anything to do with church. My mom, when they had my brother who's 4 years older than me, my mom went up to my dad and said, I want to name him Matthew. And my dad said, absolutely not, because I know that name is in the Bible. That's what my dad's reaction was. Now, 4 years later, they had me and named me Mark. So clearly this guy had never picked up a Bible before in his life. My brother's middle name is James, mine is Andrew. So we got 4 disciples knocked off, and he doesn't have a clue. So that's my life growing up. And what happened was my parents, when they got divorced, I suffered a mental breakdown that the doctor later called Tourette's syndrome. And here's what happened. The trauma of my parents' divorce gave me Tourette's syndrome. Now, I don't know if you know what Tourette's syndrome is, but it's a way not to be cool in high school. All right, it's basically what happens is you get a whole bunch of crazy habits. And so I said, that's why when I'm up here, you see like my face moves around, my body twitches around, and I have all these tics because I had Tourette's. I got it when I was like 8 or 9 years old, my parents. And so I would grow up and I would just like, if you've ever seen people with Tourette's on TV, they like randomly just swear at people, right? That was me growing up. I'd be sitting at a bus stop, I'd just be like, F you, right? Like not the letter F, the word, right? And I'd be like, now here's the one job you're never gonna get in life when you randomly throw F-bombs around at people. A preacher. Right, it's not gonna work. Right, welcome to Shepherd Church. F, get in a small group. It's never gonna work. You can't just randomly swear at people. You can't be ticking your, and here's what God did. He decided to say, no, I'm gonna take you in all your imperfection and use you. Why? Because I'm gonna do that not because you are good, but because I am good. That's what God does. In all your imperfection, He takes you in all your weird, messed up life and your experiences and the things that you believe God can never use. And He says, no, that's the stuff that makes me look powerful. And so I was gonna go into the film industry. That's what I wanted to do with my life. When I finally came to church, a bunch of people gathered around me and they said, hey Mark, here's what I think you should do. We think you should go into ministry and become a pastor. And I'm like, oh no, I do not want to become a pastor, man, because how many would agree with me that people are the worst? Like, you're all awful. And I don't like people. I don't even like, this is gonna be the worst job for me because being a pastor, you gotta be like Pastor Dudley. He cares about you, he cries for you. He knows your names, he knows your families. Oh, you should see everybody he interacted with. When I saw him, he knew their situation. I'll meet you in the lobby and you'll say, hi, my name's David. I'll be like, hi, David, delete. This information is not important in the next 6 minutes. I'm never gonna meet David again. That's how I think. This is why I would never do this job. And so God was like, no, here's what I want you to do. I actually want you to be a pastor. And I was like, no. And He said, not only do I want you to be a pastor, I want you to plant a church in Vancouver, Canada. Now, I don't know if you know anything about Canada, but it's at least a generation ahead of America in regard to secularization, right? And post-Christian culture. So I like to, when I'm speaking in front of Americans, I like to say, I come to you from the future, right? Right? Canada is where your country is going in regard to Christian ideas and secularism and post-biblical concepts. So I was gonna God's like, I want you to plant a church in post-Christian Vancouver, Canada. And I was like, I don't wanna do that. Because that means all these people, everybody I talk to, West Coast, progressive, everyone already thinks they're saved because they wear Lululemon pants and eat kale. And I'm like, I gotta get up every single week and tell them, no, you're not saved. You're not connected to the universe. In fact, you are the one common denominator for all of the problems in your life. You are a wreck. You are a disaster. But that's okay, because Jesus Christ needs to be the hero of your life versus you. Don't look inside yourself. You have to die to yourself. Jesus is the hero. You're not the hero. And everyone's like, well, that's not gonna work. In Canada, you can't say any of that. And so we started saying it. And people, this church, it started to grow, and people started to meet Jesus. And across, as Dudley was talking about, across Canada, thousands and thousands of people in this post-Christian, where revival was never supposed to happen. And he used little old twitchy me, with all my insecurities and all my nonsense and all my past issues and all my daddy issues. My father passed away when I was 15 years old, and he never even called me to tell me he was sick. Paul, see, you're the exact kind of person God uses. The Apostle Paul, do you know where he wrote the book of Ephesians from? Jail, prison. That's the kind of people God uses. So growing up in Canada, I didn't know much about Folsom Prison except from Johnny Cash, right? Johnny Cash song, Folsom Prison Blues. When I moved to Sacramento, when I arrived, they're like, oh, Folsom Prison, that's 20 minutes from your house. I'm like, what? And then I realized that we actually have a Folsom Prison campus out Bayside. 300 guys every single Sunday gather and watch our sermons and our worship on video, praising God, giving their lives to Jesus. And every week I look to that camera and I say, hey, Folsom Prison guys, thanks for coming. It is incredible. So last year they're like, okay, here's what we want to do, Mark. We want to go to Folsom Prison, and we go in there and we do like the service. And I'm like, wait, go in there? What do you mean go in there? We'll do video, it's perfect. They're like, no, we got to go live, man. I'm like, I don't know, like what? And they're like, come on, bro, you can do it. I'm like, all right, fine. So we stand outside of Folsom Prison, got the big gates, we're all standing ready to go. And I'm standing there waiting to go in, and an alarm goes off. Me. I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, sorry, there was a shanking in the prison. I'm like, oh, we gave it a shot. Let's go, all right? And they're like, no, it's 10-minute delay. 10 minutes? What are you talking about? It's over. They're like, no, we're going in. Gates open up. I walk in and I see the guy on the gurney and he's shaking like this. And I'm like, what is happening right now? And we go in, and I thought like we'd go in and have like our own little spot, like a little tunnel or something where we like pop up on the stage, or hey guys, some plexiglass or something. No, it's just right into Gen Pop. We're like, all right. We walk right in there, and guys, like it's just like the movies. All the guys are all tatted up. And I'm like walking through, and they're like, what's up? And I'm like, what's up? And I'm like, it was all like, and then finally I got into the room, and I'm like, oh, thank goodness. And they locked the gate behind me. And this, no joke, a guy just makes a beeline for me. He's exactly what you picture in prison, all tatted up, and he makes a beeline, walks right for me. And I'm like, oh. And he goes, stops in front of me, no joke, gives me a big hug, and he says, how are Aaron and the kids? And I'm like, you know my family? How long are you in for? Like a while still? Like, is this The guy knows everything about me because he's in my church, goes to my church. And the next guy walks up to me and they start laughing. They're like, you're smaller in real life. They're laughing at me. I'm like, bro, relax. And I asked God that day, what do you want me to say to these guys? And he said, preach the prodigal son story to them. And so I opened up Luke 15, and I got in front of them, and I looked at them, and I said, how many of you guys in this room had fathers that abandoned you? How many of you guys in this room had fathers who drank too much, who beat on their mom or your sister? And every single hand went up. And I looked at them that day, and I said, listen, Here's what you get in Jesus Christ. You get a father who will never leave you. You get a father who will never drink too much. He will never beat on your mom. He's a father that the minute you say, no matter what you've done with your life, even here, right now, in this room, I know that thing you looked at 2 days ago, man. I know what you did at work that completely messed it up. I know you've messed up your family. And the minute you go, maybe tomorrow could be different, the Father runs out to you and wraps his own robe around you and has a party for you. That's the God we're talking about that you get in Jesus. Nothing else is like that. And so we looked at those guys that day and we said, you might have done what they say you did, but you are not who they say you are. Because your identity has shifted in Jesus, and every single one of you sitting here right now, listen, here's what Paul says. Paul, and he's introducing himself, an apostle of Christ Jesus. Who's he an apostle of? Christ Jesus. You know what Paul wants to do right off the bat, really early in your life? He wants to make sure that Jesus, not you, are the hero of your story. Because if you try to be the hero of your story, here's what's going to happen. You are going to get crushed by the weight of the fact that you can't be the hero. It will crush you, the shame and the guilt and the burden of sin. That is why Jesus came and died on a cross for your sin. That's why he rose again for your salvation. Listen, when you're reading the Bible, here's where we get this wrong. Even those of you who grew up in church, here's what we get wrong. If you grew up in church, went to Sunday school, and you learned every week that the Bible was about you. Well, here Tim Keller points out, he says, listen, there's only two ways to read the Bible. It's either about you or it's about him. Now, if it's about you, then the David and Goliath story is a story about how you, if you can pull up your moral bootstraps and be a good person, then you can slay the giants in your life. And you know what that does? Crushes you. Or it's about Jesus, who went and slayed the giant of Satan, sin, and death for you while you sat and did nothing and then imputed that victory to you. That's a different way of reading the Bible. That's a different way of understanding your life, because Jesus is the one who wins the victory and you get to rest in his victory. See, so listen, so when you're doing your devotions in the morning, right? And okay, so you're up, it's 8 o'clock, 7 o'clock, whatever it is, whatever time and you've already read you read your story about Jesus in the Gospels, and you've already taken your photo and posted it on Instagram, hashtag Devos, hashtag godly. So let's say you've already done that, all right? You've already posted your photo. Here's the problem. You read a story that morning where Jesus was hanging out with the prostitutes and the sinners and the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and here's the problem. When you read that story, the mistake you make is you think you're Jesus in the story. You think, well, I'm just going to go minister to all the prostitutes at work, they don't know God, and I got to be like Jesus, and I got to minister to all of them because they're all such a mess of their life. No, you're the prostitute. You cheat on Jesus every single day, and you need his mercy and grace in your life fresh every morning. You are the one who needs him. And this is why the most important thing you can do with your life is make sure that Jesus is the absolute center, because he's the only one with the power to actually transform you. Some of you come in here, you're like, I want my life transformed. I want to do something great, but you're not going to the one person who can actually do it. You think when I started that church with 16 people in post-Christian Canada, I had no power in myself. The power doesn't come from you, it comes through you. It's that I sat there and I said, how am I going to reach people in this country? How am I going to reach people in this city? What am I going to do? 16 people in my house? And so we're like, okay, let's get a gymnasium. And let's just get up and start. So 50 people came and gathered in this gymnasium. And I was like, I don't have a plan. Right? I was a 29-year-old kid in running shoes and a hoodie. And everyone said, no one in Canada is going to want you up yelling at them about their sin and the Bible. You got to get up there and, entertain them. Hey, thanks for coming to our church. Please come back next week. I'll entertain you even more. Yeah. And then you get up and you don't want to proclaim anything. Just say, you have ideas and I have ideas. We all have different ideas. Sorry, right? Because you're Canadian, you got sorry about everything. I was like, wow, this sounds awful. So I just decided to start a church where I literally just picked up the Bible and would yell at people for an hour. All right, I just like, I don't know what you're all doing here. And I just start preaching, and it took me, listen, our sermon series, a year in, we were in the Gospel of Matthew. I preached through the Gospel of Matthew for 3.5 years. It was crazy. And everyone said, that's not good. Like look at this sermon right now. We're on Paul. Right? We're on Paul right now. That's the pace. 3.5 years through the Gospel of Matthew. And everyone said, that's not gonna work, bro. And you know what the series was called? It was called The Gospel of Matthew. Creative team needed a 2-month sabbatical to figure that one out. Talking about, man, what do people need? They don't need you, they need him. And so what started to happen? All these people started to show up and they started to get their life changed. And they would meet Jesus. And I would say, you are sinful and you need to come to know Christ. You need to repent of your sin. And they would go, this is so offensive. I'm gonna go get my friends. All right, and they'd go get their friends. And the church started to actually grow. And it went from 50 to 150 and to 300. We were in this little elementary school gym. And I remember I was like, oh man, now we gotta go to 2 services now because we're rammed in this gym. And this woman walked up to me and she's like, we shall not go to 2 services. This is gonna be the nail in our coffin if we go to 2 services. And I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, I need to be able to come to church and say, hey, Joanne, where are we gonna go for lunch? And hey, Sarah, and I'm like, what? So the next weekend, I got up and I looked at the church and I said, listen, we're going to 2 services because I did not start a church for you to make more friends. I started a church so that people like my dad who die without Christ and go to hell would never have to do that. And next week we're going to 2 services. And we went to 2 services and we grew by 50 people in a week. Well, she left, so 49 people. 49 people in a week. And I was like, what is happening right now? This is crazy. And so those people became this, and it grew to that, and people started to meet Jesus, and some incredible things happened. Why? Not because I have any power, but because I kept lifting up the name of Jesus. And I kept going, guys, give your life to him, give your life to him, he can transform you. And I know it had nothing to do with me, because there was a day that I remember this like it was yesterday. I was backstage, I had to walk out and preach, and I was in a mood, I just wasn't in the mood. Pastor Dudley has never been in this situation. But there are situations where pastors are just, they don't want to come out and preach, man. And this was one of mine. I was in a miserable mood. My church wasn't giving. They were just sitting there sucking resources. And I'm like, gosh, I'm gonna come out here and look over here and see Joe, been sitting in the same seat for 4 years, never invited anyone, and he gives nothing. I can see it over his head because I checked. And I gotta come out and preach to these people, slave away up there, forget it. And I'm backstage and my team's like, you gotta go out. So I went out and preached like, what I would say would be like a Jonah sermon. It's just like, Jonah, like he didn't even like the people he was preaching to, the Ninevites, right? And I walked out, I'm like, God hates you, figure it out. I don't know. And I remember our administrator pulled us in a room that Monday. She's like, I don't know what happened on Sunday, but I don't know what you said, but it was magical. What? Talking about. She's like, well, we've never seen this many people come to Christ. I mean, I'm talking, she said, we now have to do a training for our ushers to teach them how to lead people to Christ, because people were just walking up to them saying, how do I come to know the Lord, right? And they're like, bucket? Right. These people never trained in anything, just bucket? Like, I don't know how to lead someone to Christ. Why would we have to do that? Because listen, when Jesus Christ shows up and starts saving people, there is nothing you can do to stop it. You just got to try to catch up. And some of you, when you look at this and he says an apostle of Christ Jesus, what's in his head is cosmic Jesus. That's who he's going to talk about for the rest of Ephesians. Some of you in this room, you're skeptical, and that was me growing up, and you don't want anything to do with Jesus because in your mind, Jesus is some poor peasant that walked around the Middle East 2,000 years ago in sandals, and he was a victim, and you don't want to follow that. But listen, it's very important to know this. The Bible tells us that's who Jesus was for 33 years, 2,000 years ago. But it ain't who he is now. He is the reigning, ruling king of the universe that is coming back for his people. That's who we're asking you to follow. That's who we're asking you to give your life to. One of my mentors up in Vancouver, he's a 75-year-old man. I remember him sitting, there was about 30 of us preachers in a room, just learning from him and going, how do we do this for the rest of our life? How do we end well? Because, it's all about ending well. Anybody can start something, right? It's about how you end it. Anybody can get married. Any moron can get married, right? It's just like put him in a tuxedo, fool a girl for 2 years, and she'll marry you. And so you're up there, and the weddings are brutal. I don't even like doing weddings anymore because these two kids who know nothing, and they're up there, I want to write my own vows. Tommy, T means tenacious. I'm like, shut up. You don't even know her. It's not hard to get married. It's easy. Your marriage day, that is easy. You don't even know each other. You don't know about just wait 10 years and see if you think Tommy is so tenacious. Tommy's a loser who hasn't taken you to Hawaii in years. Listen, the question of marriage is not how it was on the first day, it's how was your marriage on the last day? Have you been faithful? Do you love on her? Do you serve her? That's the question of Jesus. And so we remember sitting there in front of this guy going, tell us how to get to the end. And he said, well, listen, who do you serve? Let me tell you who Jesus is. And he said to us, if you showed up at your church this weekend and you had prepared your sermon for your 10 hours and you show up to that stage and you put that microphone on and not one person shows up, he said, what would you do? And we said, I don't know. Go home? And he said, no. You preach that sermon because there are principalities and powers that need to be told that Jesus Christ has defeated them. That he is reigning and ruling and will ultimately defeat them. So this is what Paul is trying to put in front of you for your whole life. He's trying to go, no matter who you are, Christ can redeem you, Christ can use you, tomorrow's a new day. And then he says, by the will of God, to God's holy people in Ephesus, the faithful in Christ Jesus. And then he uses this, one of the most beautiful words in all of language, beginning of verse 2 is what? Grace. You know what grace means? Undeserved favor. It means that God uses you and saves you and loves you, not because you're perfect, not because you're good, but because he is. It's not that you earned it. Listen, there's no reason I should be on this stage right now. Some of you are like, yes, that's totally true. Why are you up there? I'm confused. Listen, do you know how many mistakes I've made in ministry? There's no way I should still be pastoring. There's no way. Listen, when we were a new church plant, we were in a community and it was a lot of Chinese, a huge Chinese community in Vancouver. And I walked up to this guy early in church plant. I'm like, hey bro, I want you to start a Chinese speaking community group. You're gonna kill it in this area. We gotta reach these guys. And he's like, that's a really good idea, Mark, but I'm Korean. I'm like, I know. What are you talking about? I think you'd be good at it. What are you? All right, so you guys know, you ever heard of Saddleback Church before? Saddleback, right, okay. So Saddleback Church, that's a church that like you grow up and you're like, Saddleback, man, this Rick Warren, he changed America. He's gospel and church and baseball diamonds. This guy changed the world. This is crazy. And as a young church planner, I read Purpose-Driven Church and Purpose-Driven Life. I'm like, oh. So I got this phone call like 6 months ago. And the guy's like, hey man, we'd like you to come preach at Saddleback Church. I'm like, what? That's the Super Bowl preaching. That's every young preacher. Oh, I go to Saddleback. This guy calls me up, he says, we need to come and preach at Saddleback. I'm like, what? That's crazy. So I prepped that sermon. I worked on that thing. it was gonna be good. Every word, hours, my family would come around, go away, I got a Saddleback. Figure this thing out, Saddleback. And you know, I said, I'm gonna go there, I'm gonna behave, right? I'm gonna be, you know, because those are people, not like you. You know, it's like, so I'm like, all right, I gotta go to Saddleback, man. So I prepped this sermon. So I get up and I start preaching. I'm like, hey, Apostle Paul, man, da-da-da. You know, he murdered people. Apostle Paul murdered people. I said, so you're doing better than him, because how many of you in this room has ever murdered anybody? Raise up your hand, right? So first service goes fine. And then the second service happened, and I said, how many of you murdered anybody? Nothing. The third service, though, I said, Apostle Paul, how many of you murdered anybody? You raise up your hand, and out of the corner of my eye, I see a hand go up. And I look over, and I'm like, wow, you know, thank you for your honesty. And it was the sign language lady. Let's give it up for the sign language lady. Keeping up with my nonsense. I don't know what's going on over there. I'm like, how many of you murdered anybody? Raise your hand. And she said, and I'm like, ah! I should not be doing this job anymore. I shouldn't be allowed to come. I shouldn't be allowed to preach. Listen, worst day of my life, this is to make you feel better. Worst day of my life was the day I told a woman that her husband was dead and I had the wrong guy. Your wife can't. I'm 29 years old. And I went in for a hospital visit on a Friday, and I went back home, and I went to the hospital visit on the Monday, and I just parked, went to the same room, passed by the front thing, went to the thing, and it was the guy, and he kind of was looking out the window, and I'm like, oh, and then the nurse turned me around, she said, excuse me, what are you doing? And I said, oh, I'm here for a pastoral visit. And she said, okay, and she said, I'm really sorry, he died this morning. And I was like, okay, now if you're taking notes on like how to do this well, when someone says, he died this morning, say, who? But I did not do that. So I went, oh, all right, guess David's dead. And I just went back to the office. And I told the secretary, David died this morning, and I went back to work. Well, David's wife, an hour later, drives past the church, comes in, because she had to pick something up, and she's holding a sandwich, and she's like, hey, talking to the secretary. The secretary comes back, she's like, Mark, I don't think David's wife knows that he's dead. I'm like, what? Send her back. So she goes back, and I said, where are you going? She said, I'm going to visit David. He wanted a Subway sandwich. I was with him this morning. We were having worship and his talking and his thing. And I said, oh, I'm really sorry. David's dead. At which point, she passed out. I put her on the couch, got her some water, and we mourned the death of her husband for over an hour. Before I walked out, talked to somebody, and they're like, oh, David moved to this hospital on Saturday. I'm like, wait, what? No, I was there this morning. So I said, you better call. I need 1,000% proof that this is proof of life. I need it. And so they called, and they're like, yeah, waiting for my lunch. I was like, oh, shoot. So I had to walk back into the room like, hey. Remember that thing we were talking about? She's like, I'm so confused. Like, I was with him this morning, we were chatting, I'm like, these things happen quickly. People decline fast. And I said, listen, David's alive. Now, here's the crazy thing about that. Satan used that in my life to destroy me. I was 6 months away from planting a church as a 29-year-old kid with no experience. And he said to me, all you're gonna do is hurt everybody you try to pastor and lead. Don't plant this church. And I needed people to come around me and speak the gospel into my life and say, do you know what? When Jesus got baptized, the Father said to him, you are my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. And Jesus hadn't even done anything yet. And you think you're gonna plant this church and be effective because of you? No, it's because of him. This is how we find our life. We find it in the word grace. Listen, I saw that, someone wrote this the other day. I saw this on the internet. So listen, try to connect yourself to this and find yourself, because sometimes we venerate these Bible people and we're like, they're such perfect people. Here's a list of these great Bible people. Noah. Okay, raise your hand if you identify with Noah. Noah got drunk. Raise him up. Yeah, no, get him here. Noah got drunk, all right? Some of you, you're going, yes, I've been there. Abraham was too old. Yeah, ever felt that, right? Yeah, felt that. Too old. I'm out of the game. Abraham. Isaac was a daydreamer. Jacob lied. Leah was ugly. The Hebrew says she was weak about the eyes. Joseph was abused. Moses was a murderer and couldn't talk. Gideon was afraid. Rahab was a prostitute. Jeremiah was too young. David was an adulterer. Elijah was suicidal. Isaiah preached naked. Jonah ran from God. Naomi was a widow. Job went bankrupt. John the Baptist ate bugs. Peter denied Christ. The disciples fell asleep while praying. Martha worried about everything. The Samaritan woman was divorced. Zacchaeus was too small. Paul was a murderer. Timothy had an ulcer, and Lazarus was dead. So if you're alive, you got one up on him. Which is why Charles Spurgeon, the great preacher, said, here's what I want you to do. Don't offer God your strength. He has all of that. Offer him your weakness. He has none of that himself. Listen, this church is not a country club. It's a hospital for broken, messed up sinners who need the grace of God in their life. So here's how the passage ends. Grace and peace. Underline this word if you got a Bible. To what? You. This ain't about your neighbor. This is not about your grandma and the faith that she had. It's not about Pastor Dudley. It's not about the person you came here with. It's not about your kid. It's not about your wife. At the end of the day, you will stand before God and give an account for your life and choices. This is why he says it's about you. And you know one of the great things that destroys your contentment in life? The number one thing that makes you not content in life is comparison. We have an epidemic where all we do is compare. We compare. We scroll Instagram and we say to ourselves, man, my wife doesn't look like that. Man, my husband doesn't make that much money. Man, my kids aren't that smart. Those kids, oh my gosh, those kids, I know her from the church. Those kids are going to Harvard. My kids eat crayons. I don't know what the... That person's smarter than me, better looking than me. They make more money than me. This is your life. Every day you do this, and it destroys your soul. Even as people in ministry, this happens to us all the time. We compare, right? We compare. I'm not like Pastor Dudley, man. I'm not tall like that. I don't weep like you weep, man. I don't have a pastor's heart like you have. Like, this is what happens. We compare and we contrast and we forget that God made you. Nobody else, you. And I remember the first church I ever worked at, they said, hey, Mark, you're gonna preach on Youth Sunday. I was the youth pastor. And I'm like, oh, great. I get to get up and preach in the big service on Youth Sunday. And they're like, okay, but here's the thing. This is what we do at our church. We always get up and the first thing we do is we tell a joke. And I'm like, what do you mean? Like, like a joke, like go look up at a joke book or look it on the internet. I'm like, no, that's not really what I do, man. Like, I don't tell jokes. And they're like, no, it's good because, then the people relax and their guard gets down and then, I'm like, and they're like, listen, if you're gonna preach, that's what we do here. So I'm like, all right. So I got up that Sunday. I'm like, all right, 2 Jews and a hooker walk into a bar. And then after the first service, they're like, don't worry about the joke. Don't worry about it. You're good. Just the joke. You be you, bro. You be you. And that's every single one of us. God has called you, man. He's gifted you. He has your past and your experiences to do something amazing. And he says, grace to you. And then I want you to hear this from God. And then underline this. What? Our Father. Guys, this is where we got to end. You have to have a vision of God that he is a good father that loves. And what do good fathers do, man? They love and they protect and they pursue. And some of you have a vision of God where you're like, I don't know whether God's even good. I don't know whether God loves me. I don't know whether God pursues me. And the beautiful thing about God is he was working in your life before you even knew anything about it. He was putting people in your life. He was doing, listen. So there's moments in my life where I look back and I go, my gosh, God, like there was a weekend where my wife and I, they asked us to come and do a marriage retreat up to about 2 hours from where we were in Vancouver. So my wife and I are driving up to teach about marriage for 2 or 3 days. So we're driving up, and as we drive up, my wife's like, okay, so what are we gonna talk about at this marriage retreat? And I said, well, let me do the teaching and you just chime in every once in a while. Now, yeah, right? So it sounded really good in my head. But the minute I said it, I was like, oh, yeah. And it kind of lands, and it lands with like a thump. She's like, sorry, what? And I'm like, are you sure you heard that right? I don't know. She's like, oh, no, okay, so I'll just chime in every once in a while. That's nice, that's great. I'm like, no, that's not what I meant. And then she said, okay, great. And she looked out the window and I knew what was gonna happen. I was in for 2 hours of silence. And I'm like, we need to figure this. This is what happens, by the way, when you have to go teach about marriage, your marriage sucks. So I'm driving up, dead silence, start to ask her a couple questions, hey, how was lunch this week with Sarah or whatever, and she's like, not even taking the bait. She's just dead silence out the window. So as we drove, I'm like, well, and here's what I did. I did something that I haven't done in 10 years. Because now, we're the generation, we pull our phones out, we select the album we want to listen to, put it, clip it into shuffle or whatever. I didn't do that. I hit the old school radio, right? Like just hit the button, right? And there's a pole at the front of my truck, and just lasers from space come into the pole, and they just deliver the radio, just whatever's on. That's what happens. Whatever. So I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be silent. I turned on the radio, I just hit the radio, and no joke, The song that was playing was the song that we danced to on our wedding night. Right? Like, think it now. If you don't believe in God, out of the 500 million songs that exist in the universe, right? Baby, you're all that I want when I'm lying here in your arms. I'm finding it hard to believe we're in heaven. Love it. Right? So I'm like, oh my gosh. Guys, this is the Lord just reaching through the radio going, come on, kids, we need you healed up. Let's go. I'm going to send you one here. Out of all the songs, this is the one I'm sending you. And so I'm like, baby, I'm sorry. I was an idiot. I'm really sorry. I put my arm around her, and I just see her arm out of the corner of my eye come around and go, boop, and shut off the radio. No joke. So not to make my wife the bad guy, but every single day things happen in our life and the Father drips experiences and people and moments, and you can either let them melt your heart or go cold to it. You can either recognize it that you have a good Father who pursues you long before you even started thinking about him. And all of you sitting in here right now with all the shame and the guilt of your past sin, you know what a beautiful reality of the cross is, and a Father who loves you and pursues you and protects you and seals you for the day of redemption. You know what's beautiful about it? Here's the beautiful thing about the cross, guys. The cross of Jesus Christ not only saves you and washes you clean from the sins you have done, but the sins that have been done to you. And some of you have experiences and shame and guilt, and in a room this big, there are abuses. There are things that have happened in your life that make you feel unqualified. And Jesus Christ washes you clean and makes you new. And the Father pursues you, and he wraps his robe around you. And he says, yeah, you're not perfect. Your life ain't perfect, but I'm perfect. And I'm going to do something with you you couldn't even dream about.
我諗大家啱啱都好享受阿 Mark 嘅講道啊！佢講嘅道不單止咧係風趣幽默，而且好有重點添。我好中意佢講到話咧，神會使用任何一個人。如果神會使用佢咁嘅人嘅時候，神都一樣會使用你。咁咧，如果大家仲未曾咧認識耶穌基督嘅時候咧，我想同大家介紹耶穌基督，其實佢係好愛你，神會使用你。因為佢有個目的俾你，佢喺你出世嗰刻咧，神已經係鋪排咗個道路俾你啦。咁如果大家咧願意接受耶穌基督咧成為你嘅救主嘅時候咧，咁咧好簡單嘅啫，只要做兩件事，就係心裏相信，口裏承認。咁請大家咧一齊咧心裏邊相信，口裏邊咧一齊同我講出以下嘅禱文啦。親愛嘅天父，好感謝你差派耶穌基督為我嘅罪釘上十字架。主啊，我相信你。我相信你就我嘅救主，求你赦免我嘅罪，求你帶領我，指引我嘅路。以上嘅禱告係奉耶穌基督嘅名義求，阿門。咁如果啱啱大家係第一次祈禱咁嘅禱嘅時候咧，歡迎大家加入神嘅大家庭，大家咧就係咧你大天父嘅兒子，而我哋就係弟兄姊妹啦。咁咧嚟緊落嚟咧。都係2025年嘅開始喎，仲有幾日就係啦。咁所以咧，我作為教會咧都有個全新嘅開始。咁嚟緊咧1月5號裏邊咧，我將會咧邀請到個特別嘅嘉賓，咁就嚟到我哋嘉信教會講道嘅。而劇透少少俾大家聽啦，呢個特別嘅嘉賓咧係一位傳教士嚟嘅，目前咧喺中東呢個地方咧就開始咧去諗辦法點樣去感染嗰邊嘅人嘅。咁而且咧。呢個特別嘉賓咧，仲同我哋有血緣關係嘅喎，同我同埋主任牧師有血緣關係啦，係啦。咁嗰個邊個嚟咧？冇錯啦，嗰個就係咧主任牧師嘅一個嘅親戚。咁邊一個親戚究竟係邊個咧？咁大家1月5號嚟到嘉信教會嘅實體聚會，咁就自有分曉啦。咁仲有一樣嘢就係咧，嚟緊2025年咧，我哋都會開始一個全教會嘅一個嘅活動，就叫做20 日禱告啦。咁21日禱告咧，鼓勵大家咧去禁食或者禁制某啲嘢嘅。咁大家可以咧類似但以理禁食啦，即係唔食某特定嘅嘢啦，或者唔食肉啊，淨係食菜啊等等啦，又或者去禁戒某啲嘅事情，例如好，我呢個21日裏邊我唔打機，用打機嘅時間嚟去祈禱，或者好21日裏邊咧，我決定唔睇電視或者電影啊，用睇電視電影嘅時間咧去向神禱告，咁樣呢個就叫做禁食禱告啦。咁當然啊，大家可以做最傳統嘅禁食禱告啦，可以咧一日3餐裏邊咧選擇禁食1餐。咁我都鼓勵大家咧，要啱啱係初學者嘅時候咧，都禁食1餐好啦，唔好禁食太多啦。咁當然啦，如果大家平時禁開食嘅喎，我可以一日禁2餐喎。咁當然啦，大家呢個咧係歡迎大家去自己咧去測驗一下，去衡量一下嘅喎。咁好啦，咁詳情咧，大家咧都可以問你嘅小組組長，或者上我哋家信教會嘅網站，有更加多關於禁食禱告同埋禁食禱告嘅一啲嘅材料啦。咁好啦，咁我講咗咁耐啦，咁咧都希望大家咧擁有一個咧美好嘅一個嘅星期日啦。咁咧喺同一時間咧，我希望大家呢個嘅元旦裏邊咧都會感受到神嘅恩典同埋同在。咁好啦，我哋2025年再見啦，大家新年快樂啊！